I'm calling to order this hearing. This is a public hearing of the Committee of the Whole of the Council of the District of Columbia. I'm Phil Mendelson. I'm Chair of the Council and Chair of the Committee of the Whole. Today is Tuesday, October 8th, 2024. The time is 1:19 in the afternoon. And the subject of this hearing, this is actually the first of two hearings the Committee of the Whole is having this afternoon. This hearing concerns Bill 25-793, which is entitled Resilient and Energy Efficient Historic Properties Amendment Act of 2024. This legislation was introduced by Councilmember Charles Allen and co-introduced by Councilmembers Robert White and Matthew Fruman and Zachary Parker on April 22nd of this year. The stated purpose of this legislation is to amend the Historic Landmark and Historic District Protection Act of 1978 to require that the Historic Preservation Review Board consider proposed alterations that include design elements promoting energy resiliency and water and energy efficiency as within the character of a historic district. Under the legislation, the board could propose reasonable alternatives that produce energy resiliency or water and energy efficiency benefits that are substantially similar to the proposed design element. I was reading that from the hearing notice. So in other words, to create some flexibility in the existing law, if the flexibility doesn't already exist, that would promote, encourage, facilitate energy efficiency. It says here energy resiliency. The record in this matter will be open for 2 weeks. That is, it will close at 5 p.m. on October 22nd, 2024. What that means, we're required to file a record after our hearings. And although we may not file it on the 15th day from today, we have to have a point at which the record closes. Anyone who wishes to submit a statement who hasn't or isn't has 2 weeks to do so. Again, 5 p.m. on October 22nd. We have 6 individuals who registered to testify before we get to the government. And so I'm going to call all 6 because I believe a couple of them are virtual. Fraser Walton, who's president of Kingman Park Civic Association. Rebecca Miller, who's executive director of the DC Preservation League. Kirby Vining, who is chair of the Historic Preservation Subcommittee of the Committee of 100 on the Federal City. Scott Roberts, who's co-coordinator of DC Historic Districts Coalition. Mark Rodefer, who is political chair of the Sierra Club DC chapter. And Matthias Ostian, who is simply listed as a public witness. So those who are in person, please sit at the table. Now I have to get myself organized. All right, so I think Fraser Walton is not here. Rebecca Miller is participating virtually. Ms. Miller, you're up. And I don't think I have a copy of your statement.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I'll send it in. I apologize for not having it in earlier. Good afternoon, Chairman and council members. My name is Rebecca Miller. I'm the executive director of the DC Preservation League. We're Washington's citywide nonprofit that for more than 50 years has been dedicated to the preservation and protection of the historic and built environment of our nation's capital. I'm pleased to be here today to thank you for the opportunity to provide DCPL's comments on the proposed bill. DCPL shares the DC Council's commitment to strive for excellence in sustainability practices and regularly holds programming to educate residents on greening their historic properties. In many cases, small modifications can result in increased energy efficiency for the homeowner. We are unaware of a case where HPO was unable to reach a satisfactory outcome with a property owner, so are surprised by the introduction of this bill and its proposed statement that the district's historic preservation efforts may be placed at odds with property owners' efforts to make critical climate-focused upgrades to their property, or where upgrades have been permitted, those proposals have been restricted in their scope or siting. where those changes may result in diminished benefit to the district in terms of meeting our RPS and climate goals. In 2007, DC architect Carl Alfonte coined the phrase, "The greenest building is the one that is already built," because study after study has shown that buildings built before 1945 have inherently sustainable designs due to the reliance on passive design that takes advantage of daylighting, solar orientation, and ventilation to reduce the need for heating and cooling. This is from the Preservation Green Lab 2011. Older extant buildings were constructed using more durable and longer lasting traditional materials. And studies have shown that remodeling historic buildings uses less energy than new construction across the variety of building types and climates. Historic preservation is not at odds with efforts to increase energy efficiency. In fact, these two goals are complementary. In our view, the bill seems to be seeking a solution to a problem that doesn't exist. If enacted, it would create confusion and cause delays to property owners seeking to add to the energy efficiency of their properties. Since 2019's adoption of the sustainability guidelines, the Historic Preservation Review Board has delegated authority to HPO staff for approval of charging stations, solar panels, and other sustainability enhancements. This delegation allows for direct conversations between HPO staff and a property owner to improve the compatibility of a proposal, thus eliminating the need for an HPRB hearing and reducing the turnaround period for permitting. The legislation, however, would require repeal of the delegation and referral of all cases involving sustainability improvements to the HPRB for a hearing. This would result in delay of no less than 30 days while the project is noticed for hearing to the advisory neighborhood commissions and the public. HPO staff routinely reviews and approves sustainable improvements to contributing buildings and landmarks within historic districts, including 285 solar installations within the last year. Hampering the staff's decision-making authority as proposed by this legislation will only create frustration among residents who are seeking to do reasonable improvements to their properties. DCPL asks the council to reconsider whether this legislation should be approved or whether instead a larger conversation is warranted to ensure building energy performance standards, or BEPS, are met in the future. DCPL will continue to work with HPO on programming for residents regarding ways to enhance energy efficiency in their homes and stands ready to work with DC agencies on the same shared goals. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Miller. Mr. Vining.
I'm Kirby Vining, Chair of the Committee of 100 Historic Preservation Subcommittee, presenting comments from the Committee of 100 in opposition to this bill. The introduction to Mr. Allen's bill does not explain how the Historic Preservation Review Board's existing sustainability guide for older and historic buildings dated 2019 fails to address the concerns raised in his bill, nor does it provide substantiation of his assertion that, quote, many property owners within historic districts decide not to even pursue upgrades due to the impression that their requests would be denied, unquote. This unsupported speculation, which should not be the basis for any legislation of the Historic Landmark and Historic District Protection Act of 1978, or frankly, any other legislation. Before the authorities and expertise of the Historic Preservation Office and the Historic Preservation Review Board are eclipsed by such legislation, a fair review should be made of the effectiveness of the sustainability guide in satisfying the Historic Preservation Act's mandate and the city's sustainability goals, both of which are jointly addressed in a masterful way in the guide. The guide itself states on page 5 that, quote, there's a common misconception that the principles of sustainability and green building design are at odds with those of historic preservation. Quite the opposite is true. Historic buildings offer effective solutions to save energy and continued use of buildings and materials with an existing carbon footprint within their manufacture and installation reduces new environmental effects as well as amortizing the past impacts, unquote. We could not have put the case better, and the guide has achieved this melding of seemingly disparate goals. The guide provides advice and recommendations for not only historic buildings, but for any building constructed before 1945, noting that pre-World War II buildings were built to a different and much more sustainable standard than those built after World War II. Mr. Allen also says that some homeowners face barriers when attempting to install solar panels and other upgrades in a historic district because of restrictions on such work in a historic district. It seems to us that this is an unsubstantiated assertion. Absent are examples of cases where workable solutions could not be found using the sustainability guide. How many cases have there been where such an installation was not resolved by compromise that allowed the installation and still preserve the building character that the Historic Preservation Act mandates? For example, in the Tacoma Historic District homes, solar installations have accommodated both needs. In the view of the Committee of 100, it is premature to move ahead with amending the Historic Preservation Act without studying the effectiveness of the Historic Preservation Review Board's sustainability guide. And I have attached to this some comments we made during the comment period when the guidelines were first written. We think that those guidelines evolving could be the solution to the subject of Mr. Allen's bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vining. Scott Roberts, I think, is not here. Mark Rotifer.
Thank you, Chairman Mendelsohn, for the opportunity to testify today, and thank you, Evan, for adding me to the witness list. My name is Mark Rotifer, and I'm testifying today on behalf of the Sierra Club, America's largest and most influential grassroots environmental organization with about 3,000 dues-paying members here in the District of Columbia. The Sierra Club supports the Resilient and Energy Efficient Historic Properties Amendment Act of 2024, and we urge the Committee of the Whole to approve the legislation. The district has committed to become carbon neutral by 2045, requiring that we eliminate all fossil fuel combustion over the next 20 years. This means that DC will need to fully transition its buildings off methane gas, which will require widespread adoption of energy efficient sources of heating and cooling, like air source heat pumps. It also means that DC must transition personal and fleet vehicles from gasoline and diesel to electricity, which requires new electric charging infrastructure. Additionally, DC has committed to generate 15% of its electricity from solar energy by 2041, which will require an expansion of solar panels in DC. DC is not on track to meet our climate commitments for building electrification, EVs, and solar energy. Unfortunately, the Historic Preservation Review Board is too often an obstacle to DC achieving its climate commitments, putting the aesthetics of the past ahead of the future of the planet. In 2019, after denying solar panels on homes in historic districts, the HPRB issued new guidelines purported to address this problem. The guidelines allow HPRB to continue to downsize or even outright deny solar panels, and the Sierra Club opposed the 2019 guidelines. It's unclear how many renewable energy generation or energy efficiency projects historic preservation officials have denied or scaled down since the new guidelines went into effect nearly 5 years ago. The Sierra Club requests that HPRB share with the council and the public at this hearing the number and kinds of renewable energy and energy efficiency projects it has rejected or scaled back since 2019. While HPRB views solar panels as blemishes that violate the principles of historic preservation, unsightly methane gas meters proliferate across DC's historic districts, often in front of homes. Washington gas meters did not exist during the periods of history we purportedly want to protect, yet these eyesores are allowed. HPRB has it backwards. Preserving our past for future generation requires that we move away from fossil fuels and that we embrace renewable energy and energy efficiency. The Sierra Club asks the Council to strengthen the Resilient and Energy Efficient Historic Properties Act of 2024 by amending it to remove from HPRB oversight the installation of solar panels, heat pumps, and electric vehicle chargers. Electrification, renewable energy, and energy efficiency are the steps we must take to tackle the climate crisis. We cannot let the aesthetics sensibilities of a few stand in the way of a future for us all. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today.
Thank you, Mr. Rotifer. And Mr. Postian.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Matthias Postian and I live in Ward 4. I strongly support the Resilient and Energy Efficient Historic Properties Amendment Act of 2024, and I urge the Committee of the Whole to approve the legislation. To understand why this bill is needed, we need to all understand that DC is unusual in the prevalence of buildings designated as historic. Per a 2018 article by Greater Washington, about 20% of all properties in DC are historic. This is an outlier amongst major cities in the nation. For example, Boston has 7.2% historic buildings, Baltimore 5.3%, New York 3.5%, Philadelphia 2.2%, and Chicago 1.6%. DC's share of historic buildings, just to iterate, is about 20%. Why is the share so high? I further quote from a G.G. Wash article. Very few applications for historic designation are unfavorably reviewed by the planning staff or denied by the Historic Preservation Review Board. From 2004 to 2016, 213 historic designation applications were submitted, of which only 18% were denied. In 2016, all 21 applications were submitted were approved for a pass rate of 100%. So again, per the article, DC in 2016 had 26,700 historic buildings. Currently, per the testimony of the Office of Planning for today's hearing, there are about 28,000 historic buildings. Apparently, we're adding historic properties at a rather fast clip. This brings me to the role of buildings in achieving the district's climate commitments. Buildings account for over 70% of the district's greenhouse gas emissions. The district's past progress in reducing greenhouse gas emissions have largely been achieved in the power sector. We benefited from large reductions of coal in the regional power grid and from our own initiatives with local solar. But we made very little progress, or even no progress, in other sectors. The sector where emissions are extremely sticky is the on-site emissions of our buildings. Emissions from gas that is burned in our buildings have essentially seen no decline in the last 20 years. We cannot tackle greenhouse gas emissions in our built environment without a meaningful contribution from the 20% of our buildings that are designated as historic. That's 20% by count, of course, not by gross floor area. And this bill would help us steer in the right direction. Too often, historic designations holds back energy efficiency upgrade in historic buildings. I strongly support this bill, and I urge the committee and the council to pass this bill. And I'll just note one example where people have brought up historic buildings in efforts that are related to reducing greenhouse gas emissions. I was myself involved in efforts of the building code updates this last year. And when the proposals were made to move to all electric buildings, people have said, but what about historic properties? So there are very clearly cases where the historic designation is brought up as an impediment to efforts to become carbon neutral or reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So I strongly support the bill, urge the committee and the council to pass it. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today.
Thank you, Mr. Postian. So let me see. Where do I want to begin? Mr. Postian, in your written statement, you said too often historic designation holds back energy efficiency upgrades in those historic buildings. Do you have evidence behind that? You're on mute. Mr. Postian, you're muted. Mr. Postian, you're muted.
Sorry, this is a beginner's mistake. I apologize. So I brought up this example of the technical advisory group to the building code.
Yeah, but the way I heard that is, I mean, I've heard many people say we need to grandfather in old existing buildings. That's not the same as historic preservation, which is a formal designation. So I'm asking for something that's a little more specific than.
Yeah, just to be clear, in that conversation, people did point out historic buildings specifically and just categorically claim they should be exempted because they can't be dealt with in electrical heating systems.
And is that in the Historic Preservation Act, Landmark Act of 1978?
I'm talking about the public discourse, which is basically the moment you bring something up,
Okay,
people
well,
say
my
can't be
question
done
had to,
historic designation.
my question had to do with evidence regarding the Historic Preservation Act.
Oh yeah, I can't tell you that.
Okay, Mr. Rotifer. So I was going to ask you, so I'll still ask you, how many renewable energy projects have been denied by the HPRB?
I don't know the answer to that question. And in my testimony, I requested that you put that question to the government witness today and ask them how many have been denied and also how many have been scaled back, because the guidelines allow them to scale it back. I read last night the government testimony, and it said something like, we've approved all of them except for 3 that went through some additional process. And so my question is, how many have they outright denied? I think they might be saying the answer is 0. And then my second question is, how many did they scale back? How much did they say, oh, that's too many solar panels?
I understand what you're saying.
Okay.
And I think there's nuance to that. So, I have a row house in a historic district. If I want to put solar panels on it and HPRB says or the Historic Preservation Office says I have to scale it back, that would be in tune with the concern you're raising. If I want to put solar panels on that are like just this huge installation of way beyond what I need for my house, I'm going to say rows and rows and maybe even a story of solar panels. I mean, there's a point at which it could be a lot. And if that's scaled back, but it's scaled back to what other houses, row houses on Capitol Hill have, that would not be the same as the first instance. So that's what I mean by nuance to that.
Well, there are actually limits on how much solar you're allowed to put on your house that is related to the amount of electricity you use. Historically, the rule had been you cannot put solar on your house that would generate more than 100% of the electricity you use in a year. Now, my understanding is that's slowly going up a little bit, but the point that I'm making is under current law having nothing to do with historic preservation, you can't put 5 stories of solar on your roof because that would be a lot more electricity than you could use. And there are limits to that. Largely, I think, because the utilities would rather you buy the electricity from them and use their infrastructure than that you do solar panels. So that's a totally separate issue from historic preservation. But my point is that the example you give where you do rows and rows and rows, that's not happening.
Well, I gave the example only to make the point there's nuance to how many did they scale back. So I don't think it's as simple as the number they scaled back, but I'll ask. Because then there's what's the story behind what they scaled back? Was I turning my house into a power plant, or was it actually something reasonable that they made me scale back? And I don't know, and I'll ask the question, but I'm just kind of putting out there that there's a nuance to that observation on your part that how many do they scale back?
Yes, I think that's true, but I would note, the council passed a bill saying we have to get 15% of our electricity from solar by 2041. You have passed bills saying that, we're going to be carbon neutral, not use fossil fuels by 2045. So then to say, well, yes, we've done those things, but we're actually going to make it hard for you to do the very things that we have told you to do. In my view, what you're doing is you're saying we have 2 goals that we think are important, right? Eliminating our fossil fuel use and preserving historic buildings, right?
Yeah, but what about Ms. Miller's testimony, which unfortunately I don't have a copy of, Ms. Miller, where she says, first of all, older buildings tend to be more energy efficient just by their design.
That's not true. That is categorically false. What she said the most efficient building is one that's already built. She is correct that there are a lot of what we call embodied emissions, from making concrete, from making steel. And if you build a new building, you're going to have new emissions from that stuff. And if you use an old building, we've already had those emissions. We don't have any control over them. I think that was her point. If she's saying that older buildings are more energy efficient, she is absolutely incorrect. The buildings, we didn't even have building energy codes until the 1970s during the energy crisis.
Wait a minute. I think she's talking about, she could speak for herself, the architectural design. I totally get that a house that was built in 1900 with a coal furnace is going to be less energy efficient than a house that has a heat pump, a 2024 heat pump. By the way, I live in a historic row house in Capitol Hill, and I have a heat pump that was built 7 years ago. So if we're talking about how energy, heat or cool is generated, yes, older buildings would be less efficient. I think she was talking about the architectural design of the building.
Well, my point is, your 1900s house, as an example, is going to have less insulation. It's going to have draftier doors and windows than new buildings. You know, every time the Construction Codes Coordinating Board updates the building energy code, they increase the requirements for energy efficiency. There is no universe in which a house built in 1900 is more energy efficient than a building built today. And I'm not even talking about the energy source, whether they use coal or gas or a heat pump. I'm talking about thermal heat loss in the winter and the loss of cooling in the summer. That is absolutely going to be higher in an old house unless you've retrofitted it and made it super energy efficient. What we're trying to do is to say, yeah, you can do that. You can retrofit the house. We're not going to put historic preservation over the benefits to the climate and to you of lower utility bills.
Okay, but then there's the testimony as well, which I'm going to probe with the government when they testify, that it's really not so burdensome to apply for solar panels. So in your statement, you say remove from HPRB oversight the installation of solar panels, heat pumps, and electric vehicle chargers. Now, I have a heat pump and I got a permit to put the heat pump in, and it didn't go to HPO for review. So that's just not an obstacle. And electric vehicle chargers, as far as I know, because I actually put an electric outlet in the front of my house, that's not an obstacle. So I'm kind of reacting to what I see as an overreaction, but I do want to find out from the government how much oversight there is of the installation of solar panels, because clearly there is some.
So, first of all, I'm glad you have a heat pump and an EV charger in your house, Jeff.
I actually don't have an EV charger, I just have the outlet.
Right. Well, I'm glad you're making the right choices in terms of how you heat your home. And how
I do
you
have
power
an
your
EV
car.
vehicle,
I think it's wonderful.
as do a majority of the council members,
I've noticed that from walking by Pennsylvania Avenue because I work not far from here.
even though there aren't any public charging stations that I know of.
Well,
It's a different bill and a different hearing.
I'm happy. I'm happy to hear that. I see the EVs, as I said, in front of it. I mean, I think essentially, I'm glad that you didn't have any problems with your heat pump, and I hope that most people aren't. I don't know the degree to which the degree to which this is happening. What I do know is, like right now, you decided to put a heat pump in your house. Other people, I know Matthias has decided to put one in his house. That's a very small universe of people, right? But with our climate commitments, with the Healthy Homes Act, which we appreciate your support for last year, this is really going to be scaled up, and we need to know how much this is a problem. And I think for us, the big picture question is this: you have the council has said, okay, we have two priorities that we think are really important. We want to have a lot of historic districts, 20%, as Matthias said in his testimony. We want to have a lot of historic districts. We want to protect them. We also want to meet our climate commitments. We want to get to no fossil fuels. Okay, those are both, laudable goals. The way it works now, one of them is always prioritized over the other. I have been in meetings with people from the Department of General Services, and they say, oh gosh, that project's going to be really hard to do. And the Preservation League they're not going to like it. And we're going to have to make sure that, we put the historic preservation first. And my question is, if these are both things that are legislatively mandated by the council, why does one of them take precedence over the other? And then the opinion of the Sierra Club is that, meeting our climate commitments and not having the planet destroyed by global warming, if you're going to prioritize something, we should prioritize that. So I would flip it around and say we should do both. We should do historic preservation and we should meet our climate commitments. And when and if they are clashing, I think that the climate is more important. Right now, we do it the opposite. So that's why in the Sierra Club's testimony, the request was remove oversight from those so that we can ensure that it isn't an obstacle and that we are putting the more important one first.
I'm sorry, I got to leave. Can I just make one or two real quick sentences before? I gotta
Yes,
rush
Mr.
out?
Postian.
I appreciate the line of inquiry, and I think it is important to figure out, when are there true obstacles and when there are no obstacles. But I'm having a little bit of a logical disconnect, which is that I'm hearing, oh no, this is already routinely approved. This is all working. We're not putting any obstacles on solar. We're allowing all these other things. Well, then if you're already doing it, why are you opposed to this? I don't really like people telling me that they're already doing this, maybe voluntarily or out of the good of their heart, but whenever they're asked to codify that in statute, then somehow this is a problem. That does worry me. Maybe it's not so prevalent, because if it was prevalent, you wouldn't be having a problem just putting it into code. That's my general line of inquiry. I got to rush out for a meeting, but I appreciate the opportunity
Well,
to
don't rush
testify.
out too quickly. HPRB is design review. It's
Yes.
not yes or no, you can have solar. Yes or no, you can have windows. Yes or no, you can have heat pump. It's design review. And if that's all it is, and it is viable to install the solar panels or the heat pump, then what's the issue with the design review? But if you take away the design review, I can assure you that there are property owners who will figure out ways to do things that would be quite a contrast to adjacent, the character of the immediate neighborhood. So, I mean, what the line of inquiry I'm going to have with the government officials is just how burdensome this is, because I don't think it should be burdensome. But that's a little different than saying that there shouldn't be any design review.
No,
When
I
I
understand that.
replaced the roof on my house, I believe it had to go through an HPO review, but it wasn't, I mean, I needed a roof. And what they were looking was to see whether I was going to come up with some sort of roof that was completely unlike any other roof in the historic district. It's not unreasonable. And as I recall, it delayed me, well, not at all. There were other ways I got delayed, which was the permit process. What are you telling me? Let me call, Rebecca Miller's got her hand up and we were talking about her. Ms. Miller?
Hi, yes. So, I sent you my testimony. It has studies in there that talks about how green buildings are. We even have the Building Innovation Hub here in DC that people can go to their website and you can actually, they haven't done buildings less than 50,000 square feet at this point, but if you go through their data, it shows many of the top performing buildings in the District of Columbia are historic properties. And so we're not just pulling this out of thin air. And I don't disagree. I just bought a 1905 house. There's no insulation in the attic, but I'm going to put some up there. So I can't necessarily say my current house is the most energy efficient one, but I'm making those efforts. I also plan on putting solar on that house. So there doesn't have to be a disconnect between historic preservation and wanting to help the environment, because we're all trying to go towards the same place. I just think we're speaking a different love language is what we're speaking. And what we're talking about when we're saying it doesn't necessarily need to be in the code is because how it's working currently is going through the staff review. And the staff has the opportunity to have these conversations with the homeowner to see what they're trying to accomplish. Because a lot of times there's a proposal and it's not necessarily what exactly they think they need. A lot of times if we were saying windows, for instance, a Windows salesman has sold you something and had you sign a contract, and then you go back to HPO and they say, well, that's actually not the profile of the window. They're more concerned about the profile than they are about necessarily what kind of window you're purchasing. So I think that there's just a lot of misunderstanding about what the preservation process is and what the review process is within HPO. And with this particular legislation, the way that it reads is that anytime somebody says, well, it's for energy efficiency, it would then go to HPRB. And if you disagree with what HPRB says, then HPRB then has to give you suggestions as to how to compromise on that while still making it as energy efficient. But all of those conversations are currently happening at the staff level and so they don't have to go to the HPRB and delay the permitting process for the homeowner. So that is why we think if HPO and the Office of Planning comes and presents that they are denying things left and right and they can't approve solar panels and whatnot, that there should be the larger conversation, because sometimes buildings can't get solar panels because their roof structure won't support it. It's not necessarily because of HPO. There's a whole lot of different government agencies involved in this, and yet preservation is always the target as being the problem.
Thank you. I will add to that because historic preservation law is under the Committee of the Whole's jurisdiction, we've been getting over the last year, I would say, testimony that has tried to blame historic preservation for being anti-environment, anti-affordable housing, and we're having a hard time finding where that's really substantiated. But as I said, I will ask the government about just how much of a burden there is, because it should be easy. And I think I'll leave it at that. But okay, I'm told that Scott Roberts showed up, so I'm going to recognize him and then go to the government. Mr. Roberts? Mr. Roberts, you're on.
Good afternoon. Thank you for accommodating me joining late. I appreciate it. And I want to mirror a lot of the comments that Ms. Miller from the DC Preservation League made. I'll make my testimony very brief. I submitted written testimony, which is in the file. Briefly, I'll just say that I'm a co-coordinator of an organization called the DC Historic Districts Coalition, which is just an informal alliance of individuals and organizations representing Washington, D.C.'s 37 residential historic districts and other individuals and organizations interested in the city's historic preservation, including residents of potential future historic districts. The DC HDC Historic Districts Coalition believes that this bill will complicate the successful process through unnecessary intervention by the Historic Preservation Review Board. Rather than homeowners working directly with the HPO staff, homeowners would be required to have their case noticed and heard at a public HPRB hearing, which would slow down the existing streamlined process and hinder efficient energy solutions in our city's historic districts. For these reasons, the DC Historic District Coalition is opposed to the bill in its current form. So I'd like to reiterate something that Ms. Miller said. This seems to be a solution looking for a problem. And the last thing we want to do is take a process now where a homeowner goes to and is resolved by the HPO at the HPO staff level, and then requiring to get forward to the HPRB, which is much bigger lift. It seems to me that the current process working at the HPO staff level is the best solution here, the better solution. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't have any questions for you. I do have your statement. I want to thank all of the witnesses, and I am going to probe the executive with regard to some of these concerns. So thank you, each of you. Oh, what's that? We're going to turn now to David Lieb, who is representing the Government Senior Counsel Office of Planning.
Red means on.
Yes.
Thank you.
If it's red on the microphone, the red means go.
Got
and
it.
I think green means stop.
Okay, very good. Good afternoon, Chairman Mendelson and staff of the Committee of the Whole. Excuse me, I'm David Lieb, Senior Counsel in the DC Office of Planning. The Office of Planning houses the district's Historic Preservation Office, which, as you know, promotes stewardship of the district's historic and cultural resources through planning, protection, and public outreach. Our city's historic districts enhance the district's unique sense of place and quality of life, and in doing so, they attract residents and visitors to the district. OP is concerned that Bill 25-928, if adopted, would undermine the district's historic character in the interest of sustainability, when sustainability improvements can be made consistent with historic standards. The best way to balance these interests is by updating the sustainability guidelines of the Historic Preservation Review Board. In the existing guidelines, which were the product of close collaboration between the Historic Preservation Office and the Department of Energy and the Environment, OP believes that the district has a model for working through these detailed issues in a way that accommodates competing concerns. Updating these guidelines would allow the Historic Preservation Office staff to quickly approve sustainability improvements, in most cases within days rather than the weeks that would be required for the HPRB review contemplated in Bill 25-793. As a steward of the District of Columbia's comprehensive plan, OP is also committed to achieving the district's sustainability goals. And in OP's experience, sustainability and historic preservation can work in harmony. To give you a sense of the review process for work in historic districts, the Historic Preservation Office sees between 5,000 and 6,000 building permit applications annually, most for alterations of contributing structures in historic districts. The Historic Preservation Office approves over 95% of those permit applications at a staff level, meaning without sending them to the HPRB for a public hearing. Most of these permit reviews occur either the same day or within 3 to 5 days of the office receiving the permit application. The reason the Historic Preservation Office staff can approve permits so quickly is that the HPRB has pre-approved detailed guidelines for how certain categories of work can be performed, consistent with historic standards. One of the most common alterations that the Historic Preservation Office reviews is window replacements, which can be an important sustainability improvement. High-performance double and triple pane windows that match historic windows are widely available from window manufacturers. The Historic Preservation Office readily and routinely approves such window replacements. Permit data shows that in the last 20 years, the Historic Preservation Office approved 11,200 window replacement projects, not counting larger rehabilitation projects, which often also include window replacement. The 11,200 number equates to 40% of the approximately 28,000 historic buildings in the district. Solar panels are another example of sustainable technology that is now routinely approved as consistent with historic standards. Although the HPRB at one time discouraged the installation of solar panels on the street-facing roof of a house, under sustainability guidelines approved by the HPRB in 2019, such solar panels are now allowed. Since the HPRB adopted those guidelines, every building permit for solar panels has been approved as consistent with historic standards, with all but 3 being approved at the staff level. The successful adoption of these guidelines shows that historic standards can be adapted to accommodate new sustainability improvements. Additionally, some of the sustainability improvements that are specifically called out in Bill 25-793, such as electric vehicle charging infrastructure and heat pumps, face no preservation impediments under current law because the permits necessary to install them don't undergo historic preservation review. OP is concerned that Bill 25-793 would effectively eliminate any meaningful preservation review from much of the work performed in the city's historic districts. It would do this by defining any sustainability improvement, which could describe many and perhaps most of the thousands of alterations made to historic properties every year, to be consistent with the preservation law. This would effectively exempt any sustainability improvement from historic requirements, substantially undermining preservation in the district. Although the bill would allow the HPRB to propose reasonable alternatives that achieve the same sustainability benefits, a property owner would be highly unlikely to redraw plans based on the HPRB's advisory recommendations. A property owner who doesn't want to change a proposed design element in the way the HPRB has proposed will simply ignore the board's guidance. Further, the equivalency standard set in the bill, which is defined as reasonable alternatives that produce energy resiliency or water and energy efficiency benefits substantially similar to the proposed design element, would be difficult for the HPRB to apply. OP recognizes that building technologies are evolving and must evolve to meet the challenge of climate change and is committed to working with DOEE to determine how important sustainability improvements can be made consistent with historic standards. We think the best way to accomplish this is within the existing preservation law. This concludes my testimony. Thank you for the opportunity, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Mr. Lieb. Give me just a second. put me on a 10-minute clock as another council member is present. So there was testimony that HPRB has oversight over installation of solar panels, correct?
Solar panels require permits, so they do come for historic review. But as I said, they
about-
mostly go to the Historic Preservation Office for
Yes.
permit.
What about heat pumps?
Heat pumps that are mounted on the ground, as you described having yourself, Mr. Chairman, do not get reviewed. My understanding is that most of those are installed based on an electrical permit, and that does not go for HPRB review.
Well, mine's on the roof and it didn't go to HPO as far as I know.
Okay, well, that may have similarly gone for a
Electrical permit.
electrical permit. If my understanding is if there's some structural element to it, so there's some situations where a mini split, which I think can involve a heat pump, is going to be attached to a wall. Then there's a structural element that might require a building permit that would go for preservation review.
What about electric vehicle chargers?
Electric vehicle chargers do not go for preservation review. Again, my understanding is it's pursuant to an electrical permit.
Okay, so in your testimony, you said that every building permit for solar panels has been approved. How about scaled back?
So I heard that discussion in the earlier testimony, and that's something I don't have data on. My understanding is that all but 3 since 2019 adoption of the sustainability guidelines have been approved at the staff level. So that suggests that there wouldn't have been significant historic issues with what was proposed. But I cannot tell you that there was not some slight reduction of them. And I think that's something on which Steve Colcott, our Deputy Preservation Officer, is here, and he might be able to give a more detailed
Can you
answer to
come
that. if
forward
that's
and
okay.
speak to that?
Good afternoon, Steve Colcott with the Historic Preservation Office. Our staff works very carefully with solar installers to live by the phrase that's in the sustainability guidelines, which is to work to ensure that solar efficiency is achieved for the building. So if the solar installer tells us we need 10 panels, then we understand that the property has to have 10 panels to achieve the solar efficiency that the property needs. So we will not negotiate down from what the solar installer says is the requirement to achieve solar efficiency. The 3 cases that went to HPRB relatively early on after they adopted the 2019 guidelines were issues in which the board was talking directly to the solar installer about, can the panels be placed in a slightly different way to avoid the chimney to be pulled back on the property. But they also were very careful to ask the solar installer, what do you need to achieve the level of efficiency that this property needs? And was clear in not taking away the number of panels that were needed.
So the guidelines, do those guidelines speak specifically to solar panels sufficient to generate energy for the structure?
It says if panels are needed for solar efficiency for the building and it can't be achieved on secondary elevations, then you can propose them on a forward facing elevation. So the idea is that ideally, if you can do it on a secondary elevation where it's not prominently visible from the street, that's the preferred
And
preservation
that
solution.
implicitly is saying sufficient for the building,
Correct.
which would be net zero for the building,
At
at least in terms of electricity, could be net zero.
could be net zero.
Yeah, you're not looking at net zero. You're looking, what I'm hearing you say is you're looking at what the solar installer is recommending.
Correct.
And it could be the solar installer is recommending net zero for the building.
Correct.
But that's not what you're not looking at that latter part. What about the testimony earlier that it couldn't be greater than what's necessary for the structure? Is that prohibited under the guidelines?
To my memory, that's not discussed specifically. That may be a a standard that the utilities established, but it's not specifically addressed in the sustainability
So
guide.
you're saying it's not your issue, but you are looking to update these sustainability guidelines?
In talking to DOEE, we certainly understand that there are new technologies that perhaps warrant revisiting the guidelines, and we're certainly happy to work with them in doing that. They're obviously the subject expert on the emerging technologies, and we would need to understand better from them the types of issues that they think the guidelines should address.
How long have you been at HPO?
32 years.
32 years. So you have been around when all these solar applications have come in. Are you aware of any or many that have been scaled back that didn't go to the board?
Certainly not since 2019, no. We've worked very hard to make sure that that's not the case.
I feel like I had another question, but let me see. So I think I just asked this, but you are looking at updating the sustainability guidelines.
Yes, again, the guidelines were actually prepared by DOEE under a contract that with a contractor that they provided and paid for, and with substantial input from our office. And so it would certainly have to be a collaborative effort for it to be effective in addressing the sorts of issues that they see as emerging that need to be addressed.
So I'm looking again at testimony. It's unclear how many renewable energy generation or energy efficiency projects historic preservation officials have denied. But what I'm hearing from you, at least with regard to solar panels, it's zero.
Correct.
So tell me again, how burdensome is the process? In terms of going to, so somebody, homeowner wants to get a solar panel, wants to put in solar panels. I'm guessing, but this shouldn't be a leading question, but maybe I'll make it that. I'm guessing it's probably more of a hassle to find the solar panel installer and to work through all of that, which is a complete mystery. Who comes to you, the owner or the solar panel installer?
Most of the time it's the solar panel installers, and we see the same 10 to 12 companies who I think have a pretty, or at least have gained a good understanding of preservation principles, with the slight exception that, of course, there's a slight distinction between Georgetown and projects that are reviewed by the Commission of Fine Arts. They have different standards. It's a federal agency that we have don't have jurisdiction over. But we've tried to ensure that the solar installers that we regularly work with understand that preservation should not be a limitation to solar installations. And of course, we tell the same thing to property owners if they contact us individually.
Give me just a sec. A couple more questions. So in the introductory statement for the bill, the council member said it's unclear how many property owners within historic districts decide to not even pursue these upgrades due to the impression that their requests will be denied, unquote. I think it's always hard to prove a negative. How many people didn't talk to you? But is there more that HPO or Office of Planning can do to educate homeowners in historic districts before they apply for permits? So that they understand that they can do things like solar panels?
We've certainly, as I said, previously, we've certainly tried to educate the solar installers who we view as, the primary audience or the most efficient audience for us to educate and try and discuss these issues with so that they can disseminate information to property owners and expeditiously apply for building permits. We could potentially publish more information about the types of projects, energy efficiency projects, permits that have been approved to just show in the sheer numbers the types of the numbers of projects that have been approved to give to let people know that these are regularly approved. But again, I think the sustainability guidelines and perhaps updating those would be another way.
What
to do
about
that.
on your website? Does the website speak to things like solar panels and windows?
The sustainability guidelines, of course, are on the website, the OP website. I don't, and of course, when they were first published, we did a press release about them, but I don't think we regularly talk about them on a recurring basis. And I don't think there's a special page that.
Or like an FAQ, can I put solar panel? I have a historic house, can I put solar panels on it? You don't have that.
No, we don't.
You might consider that. I have one other question, but I'm over my time. Councilmember Pinto, if you're here, do you have any questions? Not getting a response. I'll ask my last question. Does OP or the Historic Preservation Office or the board have sufficient expertise to, and I quote from the bill, propose reasonable alternatives that produce energy resiliency or water and energy efficiency benefits substantially similar to the proposed design element, unquote?
We have very talented members on the Historic Preservation Board, including many architect members. But and many of them whose practice includes energy upgrades to buildings that they're working on, but they don't really have the expertise to be able to, and particularly in a public hearing with limited information, to be able to effectively provide that guidance. They can provide design review guidance on what are acceptable treatments. And again, they can understand the number of panels that are needed for a solar installation or what the goals are and suggest alternatives, but they're not really subject experts in energy efficiency.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, I read that standard as really requiring almost a quantification of what the impact of one improvement would be versus another. And I think that's the thing that strikes me. It would be very challenging for the board to venture while they're sitting there reviewing a project.
To getting into the details of one approach toward energy efficiency toward another versus another.
Right.
Any other questions? I don't think I have any other questions. I will remind everyone, the record is open for 2 weeks. That is to say, the record will close at 5 o'clock on October 22nd, 2024.
Thank you very much.
I have a second hearing coming up, so which will start about 5 minutes after I adjourn this one. This one hearing again has been on Bill 25-793. The time is 2:18 p.m. and this hearing's adjourned. I'm calling to order this hearing. This is a public hearing of the Committee of the Whole of the Council of the District of Columbia. I'm Phil Mendelson, Chair of the Council and Chair of the Committee of the Whole. Today is Tuesday, October 8th, 2024. The time is 2:33 in the afternoon. We are having this hearing in the Johnny Wilson Building. Many, if not most, of the witnesses will be in person. Some may be participating virtually. The hearing is available on our council's website, which is www.dccouncil.gov. The subject of this hearing is Bill 25-928, entitled the Deferred Retirement Option Program Amendment Act of 2024. Deferred Retirement Option Program is sometimes referred to as DROP. This legislation was introduced by Councilmember Pinto on July 12th of this year, and it was co-introduced, looks like by all of the council members. And the stated purpose of this legislation is to establish a deferred retirement option program to allow retirement eligible fire and emergency medical services and Metropolitan Police Department members to continue working for up to 3 years while collecting supplemental payments in a separate retirement account. I'm going to kind of leave it at that. I'm going to note that the record will close in 2 weeks. That is, it will close at 5 p.m. on October 22nd. So anybody who wishes to supplement their testimony or submit a statement who hasn't done so has 2 weeks to do so. We are joined by Councilmember Pinto, and she may have an opening statement before I turn to witnesses. Councilmember Pinto.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much, Chairman Mendelson, and thank you for holding this hearing today on this important legislation. Over the last several years, maintaining appropriate staffing levels in our district public safety agencies has become an increasing challenge. Both FEMS and MPD have struggled with staffing shortages and the significant overtime pressures that result from being short-staffed. And I hear this from members across both agencies of how tiring it is and how many overtime hours people are being asked to work. This is not just an issue that we're seeing in the district. Staffing shortages within fire and police departments have become a major concern across the country. And while there have been improvements related to increased staffing levels as it currently stands that we've been able to make over the last 2 years, we are still far from where we need to be, especially given the growing demands on our public safety system. Over the last several years, I have been focused on getting more folks in the door for these agencies. We've put in place bonuses, housing and tuition benefits, and other hiring incentives. However, as we bring more folks into the fold, it is equally as important to stay focused on how to ensure we retain our excellent firefighters, EMS workers, and police officers into our current FEMS and MPD departments. The council recently passed a bill to ensure retired FEMS and MPD staff and officers could continue earning their retirement, but come back to work at the Office of Unified Communications. Similarly, as is the discussion today, providing options to stay on the forces longer is one more important tool that we should be utilizing. The Deferred Retirement Option Program Amendment Act of 2024, otherwise known as DROP, aims to tackle these staffing issues specifically by focusing on improving the retention of our most experienced firefighters and police officers. This bill proposes establishing a Deferred Retirement Option Program, which will allow retirement eligible members of FEMS and MPD to continue serving for up to 3 years beyond what their normal retirement date would be. I think this is a crucial step in the right direction towards improving our hiring and our retention capacity within our public safety agencies. The advantages of allowing experienced FEMS and MPD personnel to remain on the job longer are very clear. This will help both agencies retain institutional knowledge and ensure that both departments maintain high standards of service and continue to operate effectively, even as we continue to expand our efforts to get new staff in the door. So I hope that this bill can move forward. I plan to continue focusing on tools to strengthen, stabilize, and support our public safety agencies. And I look forward to hearing from our public witnesses today about the best way to implement this proposal. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember. So we have 7 witnesses. I'm going to call all 7 until the 4 seats are filled, and some, I believe, are participating virtually. David Hoagland, President of the District of Columbia Firefighters Association, IAFF Local 36. Andrew Pantelis, 4th District Vice President, International Association of Firefighters. Kelly Bush, Vice President and Head of Strategic Relations with Empower. Gregory Pemberton, Chairman of the DC Police Union. Regina Bell, General Vice President, Washington Teachers Union. Edward Montgomery. And Hank Kim, who's Executive Director and Counsel with the National Conference on Public Employee Retirement Systems. We will have a clock, but given that this is the only group of witnesses, I probably won't cut you off until it gets to be like 20, 25 minutes. Well, maybe shorter. I was just exaggerating. Mr. Hoagland, you're first, and good afternoon.
Okay. Good afternoon, Chairman Mendelson and Councilmember Pinto. I appreciate your leadership and the work of your staff to facilitate this hearing today. As President of the District of Columbia Firefighters Association, IAFF Local 36, I'm very appreciative of the opportunity to collaborate on a responsible piece of legislation that will equally benefit the citizens, the government, and our members. Since its introduction, there has been equal enthusiasm amongst our members and the council. I want to thank all 13 members of the council who signed on as co-introducers. Staffing, training, and resources are the key areas of focus for our organization. Specific to staffing, our department is currently placing an emphasis on recruitment that is unprecedented. I want to commend the department on their efforts. The competition for paramedics has never been higher. Attached to my testimony as supplemental information is a list of news articles that cites a national trend of decreased interest in first responder careers. We need to continue to remain competitive and attract individuals to careers in law enforcement and the fire service here in the District of Columbia. While recruitment is certainly needed, we have noted that no measures have been taken to retain our members. Experience gained over the course of a member's career is highly valuable for a variety of reasons. The institutional wisdom equates into decisive action, efficient execution, and a safer emergency scene. Most importantly, retaining experienced members provides excellent mentorship along with the stability of our department. During testimony in previous performance oversight hearings, the department has made it clear that there are no measures in place that forecast when members plan to retire. We have seen time and again waves of eligible members retire. In the wake of these retirements, we see higher overtime costs, fiscal instability, and a loss of institutional knowledge. This volatility can hamper not only short-term agency goals, but the long-term vision as well. A deferred retirement option plan is a proactive human resource tool that can provide predictability to agency staffing levels. This tool will also help the department get to the correct staffing factor. Based on the amount of enrollees in DROP, the department can more accurately address attrition. DROP programs are used throughout the country. Virtually every department surrounding the district has a DROP program. The Baltimore City Fire Department has had a DROP program since 1996. Montgomery County, Maryland's program has been in existence for 25 plus years. You will hear from IAFF 4th District Vice President Andrew Pantelis, who hails from Prince George's County, another department with a DROP program. Authorizing the Presumptive Disability Act. At that time, I know there was much concern about the potential fiscal liability that accompanies new legislation. I'm proud that those fears never came to fruition, and today that bill now covers twice as many occupational diseases than originally written at the same cost. This scrutiny is a signal of good governance, and we stand ready to solicit input from all parties on ways to make the DROP programs a sustainable solution for retaining experienced firefighters and police officers here in the District of Columbia. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thank you very much. Andrew Pantelis.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you, Chairman Mendelson, members of the council. I'm Andrew Pantelis, and I'm the 4th District Vice President of the International Association of Firefighters. I have the privilege of representing 30,000 professional firefighters across the District of Columbia, Maryland, Virginia, West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and Delaware. And just here to give a little bit of an overview about DROP programs, not only in the Mid-Atlantic region, but also nationwide. As President Hoagland indicated, that there are multiple jurisdictions that surround the District of Columbia in the DMV region, all currently employ DROP programs as a benefit for their fire and police departments. Baltimore County, Baltimore City, Montgomery County, Fairfax County, Anne Arundel County, and Prince George's County, just to name a few. Prince George's County is a jurisdiction similar to Anne Arundel County that recently implemented a DROP program. And our focus when we're implementing these DROP programs has been cost neutrality. It's in the interest of the jurisdiction. It's in the interest of the trustees of the Fire Police Pension Plan and the participants, the firefighters and police officers, for the solvency of these pension plans, that these programs are cost neutral. It's been very effective in Prince George's County. And if implemented in the district, it would bring the District of Columbia up to par with the rest of the country, the region, and allow them to remain a competitive recruiter. It really is an effective human resource tool. It brings stability and predictability to hiring. Our jurisdictions have the ability now to hire to address upcoming retirements based on the number of DROP enrollees. And DROP also allows departments to retain experienced firefighters at the end of their career to be able to train new employees, because from the fire and EMS department perspective, it takes years and years of experience to really just achieve a knowledge base just due to our dynamic occupation. Our needs currently to focus on recruitment efforts, it's never been higher in our history. That's not only in the district, but regionally as well. And we've never put as much money, manpower, and focus on recruitment as we have today. In addition, our advanced life support providers, our paramedics, recruitment needs, the demand for them is at an all-time high on a national level, and programs such as DROP are really an effective recruitment tool to be able to recruit paramedics as well. We discussed a little bit about cost neutrality, but not only that, DROP programs can often save jurisdictions money on various benefit programs, particularly healthcare costs, because if you have a DROP enrollee and you do not need to replace them with a new hire employee, you're not paying the healthcare costs or expenses on the retiree side and for the new hire at the same time. So it allows for an additional 3 years, as proposed now in the District of Columbia, to have a savings and realize a savings on healthcare costs. In fact, we've had so much success in jurisdictions such as Prince George's County and Anne Arundel County that initial DROP programs of 3 years are now being revisited to add additional years into the DROP programs, 4, 5, 6, 7 years, because these programs have been so successful to allow for attrition planning. And they've really been an effective tool for us on the recruitment side as well. So for those reasons, along with the testimony of President Hoagland and the others that will follow, I respectfully request your support of the DROP Act. Thank you all for your time this afternoon. I'd like to thank DROP Act sponsor, Councilmember Pinto, and the entire council's co-sponsors for your support of this important legislation.
Thank you, Mr. Pantelis. Can you provide us with a copy of your statement?
Yes, I'll submit that for the record.
Thank you. Kelly Bush.
Yes, good afternoon, Mr. Chair and other committee members. Kelly Bush, Vice President, Head of Strategic Relations at Empower. I'm pleased to be here today and grateful for the opportunity to share my insights. With over 30 years of industry experience in the public sector, particularly in the realm of DROP plans, I'm recognized as an authority in my field and often asked to testify and or assist in creation of legislation for these DROP plans. Furthermore, as I said, I am at the pleasure of Empower. Empower Empower is a record keeper of these drop programs as well as other deferred compensation, et cetera. And Empower's reach extends about 5,700 government agencies, 5 million participants, and a substantial number of whom participate in drop plans. So I come from a couple of different perspectives. I come from a perspective of, in my role, being extremely a technical role and a role that is working with a lot of governed bodies to create legislation, help them understand it, the good, the bad, everything about these things, and making sure they have a good path forward to creating a substantial plan that can be sustained throughout years to come for both not only the members, but also for the respective plan sponsors. I have the privilege of traveling across the country, coast to coast. I'm housed in Southern California, but I am coast to coast, and I speak with leaders interested in establishing these drop programs. And over the past couple of years, I've had the privilege and the honor of consulting with the DC leaders there that are testifying today, and have been very impressed with their process. And I'll speak a little bit about that at the end here, because I think that's important to mention for this committee. When I'm asked to lean into any sort of things with drop programs, there's one question I'm asked at the very beginning. And it's, what is the key to creating and maintaining a cost-neutral drop program? And as much as I would like to get in my own head and come up with a really technical response, candidly, the best answer is plan design. There are several levers within plan design that really allows a program to be cost neutral. And it's also not just the benefit of a lump sum payment to the members, but it's also something that can be used, as you've heard from everyone so far today, as a human resource tool for really doing the forecasting and understanding the attrition of their members, of their personnel, especially in the public safety arena. So the fact that I don't have a bubble, I am actually across the country, and I speak to the big 50, where the 50 largest police departments in the country and the IFF and everything. One thing I do know is that the attrition on public safety is difficult. Hiring quality individuals coming in is difficult, and the forecasting of that is something nearly impossible for a lot of larger employers to understand. And the local leaders there in DC have considered several approaches to create an attractive plan for the members and ensuring fairness and balance with the district, and something that, again, that I think is worth mentioning, because I don't always find that as I cross the country and I have these conversations. So I'm usually the voice of reasoning. Some benefits that extend beyond the lump sum payout. I want to make sure that I just reiterate this: reducing the training cost of new employees. As a record keeper, we see that significantly. We see that firsthand. Retaining experienced employees in the hard-end judgment and expertise, competitive landscape in the public safety across the country, and planning and better understanding the attrition of managing headcount and forecasting. Those are some things that extend beyond the benefit of lump sum. And I'll end with what I started with. I'd like to acknowledge the process followed by the IFF and the FOP union leaders there. I see this sets them apart across the nation. I have an opportunity and the privilege of meeting with a lot of union leaders, and they were careful at every step and thoughtful with every decision. They had a very prudent and judicious process. And I recognize that as more than benefit of their members, it's also how the program can be advantageous to the district and as a valuable human resources tool for managing human capital effectively. So this concludes my testimony. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bush. And I don't have a copy of your statement. Would you provide that, please?
Yes, I will.
Thank you. Gregory Pemberton.
Thank you. Good afternoon, members of the committee. Thank you for this opportunity to testify. As the chairman of the DC Police Union, I speak on behalf of approximately 2,900 sworn police officers, detectives, and sergeants who serve this community as members of the Metropolitan Police Department. I've been a DC police officer for 19 years, and I take great pride in serving the city. I'm providing testimony to express our support for Bill 25-928, the Deferred Retirement Option Program Amendment Act of 2024, otherwise known as the DROP Act. The losses that MPD has experienced in staffing are alarming. When I took office as head of the police union in April of 2020, reports showed that we had 3,626 members of the rank and file, which is all officers, detectives, and sergeants. Our most recent membership report from September 20th, 2024 states that we are down to 2,983. This is a net loss of 643 union members. The full sworn strength of MPD appears to be less than 3,330 officers. The last time MPD saw its ranks of sworn members this low was in 1967. For fiscal year 2024, the MPD has used over 1.7 million hours of overtime to make up for these staffing shortages. If this attrition rate continues unabated, we will continue to see these staffing numbers drop. This would be catastrophic for the city. The DROP Act comes at a critical time when our membership and the number of police officers who protect and serve the citizens of the District of Columbia is at this historic low. Significantly, by allowing MPD members with 25 years of service to delay their retirement, the DROP Act will help ensure that the most experienced and knowledgeable MPD members will continue serving the citizens of the district, while at the same time allowing them to impart their decades of wisdom and insight on MPD's newest members. Indeed, over the past several years, the DC Police Union has witnessed a concerning trend of MPD members retiring immediately upon becoming eligible for retirement. The DROP Act will provide a necessary incentive for those highly experienced members to remain with the MPD as sworn members. Over the past 5 years, 767 members have retired from MPD for an annual average of 127 members. 50% of those retirements occur as soon as members become eligible at 25 years of service. If a drop program were implemented and just 10 to 20% of those members participated in the program, the MPD could retain 15 to 30 members per year. This would go a long way in helping stabilize staffing levels. Other programs, such as the Senior Police Officer Program, have been less successful in retaining sworn members because the SPO program requires members to first retire and then relinquish their seniority and accept a reduction in pay before becoming eligible to participate in the program. In contrast, the DROP Act will allow sworn members to seamlessly remain in their positions with the MPD without relinquishing any seniority or pay. This allows participants to continue to advance their careers and be promoted or assigned to specialized units, which in turn provides more flexibility for the MPD to fill their needs. The DROP Act will also prove to be a useful tool for recruiting new officers to the MPD. Specifically, the DROP will help the district compete with other law enforcement agencies that already have their own version of the DROP Act, such as Montgomery County, Prince George's County, and the Maryland State Police. At the same time, having a drop program makes the MPD a more attractive employer than other local law enforcement agencies that do not have any similar drop programs. In 2022, Mayor Muriel Bowser set the goal of rebuilding MPD back to a police force with 4,000 sworn officers in order to provide an appropriate public safety environment in the district. Unfortunately, the number of sworn officers has dropped to 3,200, and the current market for police officers is highly competitive. The DC Police Union wholeheartedly agrees with the mayor's public safety goals and believes that a DROP Act is a step in the right direction in helping to achieve the district's hiring and retention objectives. The DC Police Union would like to thank the council for supporting the DROP Act, and particularly Councilmember Pinto for introducing this legislation. I welcome the opportunity to address the council and further answer any questions it may have. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Regina Bell.
Good afternoon, Chairman, Councilmember Pinto. I'm Regina Bell, General Vice President of the Washington Teachers Union. I'm here to testify about the Deferred Retirement Option Program Amendment Act of 2024. This bill provides an incentive for retirement-eligible police officers and firefighters to keep working in DC that did not previously exist. I am testifying to advocate that Bill 25-928 provide the same incentive for retirement-eligible ET-15 teachers. The number one benefit of a drop for employees is that it allows them to keep employees working longer. For the advantage for employers is to allow employees to keep working longer. In education, being able to keep a stable and experienced workforce is a definite advantage. Like DC police officers and firefighters, retirement-eligible ET-15 teachers must ultimately select between retiring from DCPS and collecting retirement benefits, or continue working at DCPS and collecting a salary. Currently, retirement-eligible ET-15 teachers who desire to keep working are incentivized to retire from DCPS, collect their DC pension, and go to teach in Maryland, Virginia, or at a charter or private school, all of which puts them outside of DC public schools. This structure also deprives DCPS students the most experienced teachers. Fairfax County has been providing this benefit to all members of the county's retirement system since 2005. The program was adopted in response to employee interest in added benefit flexibility and management's recognition that DROP would assist in workforce planning. Florida offers DROP to school personnel who are members of the Florida retirement system, including teachers, school nurses, bus drivers, and school administrators. The state has expanded the program to help fill the staffing gap. Later this month, there is a hearing on teacher retention, teacher and principal retention. Perhaps DROP will help retain more of those teachers. Thank you for allowing me to testify.
Thank you, Ms. Bell. Edward Montgomery, I believe, is not here. Hank Kim.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the council. My name is Hank Kim, and I'm the Executive Director and Counsel for the National Conference on Public Employee Retirement Systems, also known as NCPERS. We are the largest trade association for state and local pension plans. We have about 500 plan members throughout the United States. Some of the largest pension plans that you may recognize, including CalPERS with their $500 billion of assets under management, to smaller municipal-based retirement systems like the DC Retirement Board. We are based here in Washington, DC, and I think my job here today is to provide sort of a quick historical overview as well as a national perspective relative to drop plans. So drops first came into being almost 50 years ago, so there is a long track record of drops. It was first established in Louisiana in 1981. And it really blossomed into a very popular set of programs in the 1990s. As it's been testified, it is very prevalent among public safety personnel and public safety plans, partially because of the early retirement ages within public safety. But as just recently testified by Ms. Bell, it is also available to teachers and general employees as well. In terms of drop plan design, it varies, as a number of other witnesses have testified. There are so many different aspects and levers that you can turn on or turn off or adjust that one drop plan is the variety of drop plans vary as much as there are public plans in the United States. What is consistent, though, I think, is over the last dozen years or so, there's been a real effort to make drops as well as state and local pension plans sustainable. So, in terms of manipulating the various levers, I think there's been consistent and concise efforts to make sure that when drop is implemented or when drop is adjusted, that it is done so for the preservation of the parent plan system. As a number of others have testified, the reasons why drop are valued by employers include retaining experienced employees, again, particularly with public safety because of their early retirement ages. There is an opportunity to maintain experienced employees, attracting new employees, again, because of the prevalence of drops in many jurisdictions. If a jurisdiction or its plan doesn't have a drop, in many instances, it can be a deterrent to hiring new employees, as well as furthering the goal of a pension plan, which is predictability and predictability retirement and enhancing retirement security when employees separate. In terms of employees, they get the benefit of a lump sum distribution without any actual reduction of accrued benefits, and as a reward for a long time service. I have 10 seconds, so real quickly, all the surrounding jurisdictions around Washington, D.C., including Arlington, Fairfax, Montgomery, and Prince George's, have drop plans. I serve as vice chair of one of the plans in Fairfax County, the Uniform Retirement Systems, and we are very proud of our drop program as well. So with that, let me pause. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kim. I don't have a copy of your statement.
I will provide it.
Reading one, but you will provide one.
Yes.
So nobody really explained what a drop plan is, and it would be helpful to do that for the record. Who wants to take a stab at it?
Thank you, sir. So the drop plan, the way it's designed is that when a member reaches retirement eligibility, they would then notify the retirement board that they want to participate in the drop program, which would trigger their annuity calculations and their retirement. However, they would make an agreement not to separate from the agency for the way it's planned out now is for 3 years. So they would remain on the department for another 3 years. And that those monthly annuity payments that they would normally be collecting as retirees would then be deposited into an interest-bearing account, which they would not have access to until they separated at that 3-year mark. So the idea here is that the employees stay on with all of the benefits, the seniority, the earnings, the pay scale, the ability to apply for specialized units, apply for promotions, as if they had stayed on the department. However, their annuity payments are now accruing interest into an interest-bearing account. And so then when they separate at that 3-year mark, they would then gain access to that account, which would be a lump sum, which would sort of catapult them into retirement with a large lump sum of money, would be 3 years worth of their annuity payments with interest that had been placed into that account. And so now they're going to move into retirement with not just their first monthly annuity check, which is typically a significant drop from what their paycheck looks like. But now they have a large lump sum of money that they can use for whatever that is, to pay off their mortgage or pay off their kids' school loans or maybe buy a second home somewhere. Whatever it is they want to do to start their retirement life, they now have that financial ability to do so. And I think it helps stabilize public sector employees as they move into retirement. And I think what we're focused on here today is that this is something that's going to stem the tide of that sort of immediate retirement as soon as people become eligible. This is something that's going to be very attractive to members. In my testimony, I talked about maybe 10 to 20% of people taking advantage of this. I think that's a very conservative estimate. I mean, we don't have any empirical data, but I will tell you this is something that members clamor for whenever we're in a union setting speaking to members, is that they would love these programs. And they cite, as my colleague here stated, that there are agencies all around this area and all over the country that offer this, and members that do take advantage of it speak very highly of what it means to them from a financial aspect, from a retirement aspect.
Does anybody else want to add to that description?
Real quickly, so it's sort of a hybrid, right? From the employer standpoint, the employee is still active. From the pension plan's perspective, the employee has retired. Their benefits are fixed at that point of retirement, and they are awarded, they get their pension benefit, but it doesn't go into their pocket. It goes into another account that they do not have access to until they fully separate out of DROP. And the benefit for everyone is, while the employee is still employed by, in this case, the District of Columbia, any increases in salary, any additional increases in credit does not get recognized by the pension plan. And so it gives the plan sponsor or the city the extra 3 years of employment. But from the pension plan standpoint, the participant in DROP has actually retired at that point.
I have a bunch of questions. But it could accelerate folks who retire. So right now, a person retires when they're become eligible, or maybe they stay longer. With the DROP plan, why not retire on the first day? Because you're collecting both pension, which is going into a savings account, so to speak, as well as getting your salary.
So it's going to depend on the financial desires of any individual. So if you stay on the department, say with MPD, become eligible at 25 years, but you decide to work until 28, but not take advantage of the DROP, you're going to earn pension credits on those years of service because you haven't yet triggered your retirement. So we will actually increase your annuity payments once you separate, but you also won't have this lump sum of money. So that might make more sense to some members, where other members, they take advantage at that 25-year mark. Their pension is going to be calculated and locked in. So even as they stay those 3 years, they're not going to be building those pension credits, the 2.5% annually that they could earn towards their pension. Or if their salary increases, that won't be part of the salary calculation to develop their annuity.
For MPD, an officer who served 25 years, 26 years, the annuity goes up 2%?
2.5% per year.
Per year.
Yes, sir.
And so they would forego that.
They would forego those.
So is that the same for fire and EMS?
Yeah, so the plan, our summary plan includes police officers and firefighters. So it's the same eligibility. So at 25 years in our current tier 3 version of retirement, these members can then retire. So the benefit for the agency, right, is it saves you a lot of administrative hurdles, because right now all we have to do is give 60 days notice as a courtesy, right? And then we wait for the retirement to be processed after our retirement date, which can take some time. I think the benefit is we don't have that delay in the member getting their first annuity payment because they're still working, and it gives DCRB plenty of time to process that change. And at the end, and the agency, as you know, Chairman Mendelson, from your experience, right? You can't just say, okay, we've got these people on the retirement list, let's train a firefighter or a police officer in 60 days. It takes much longer than that. So based on the number of drop enrollees, the agency can then predict attrition, and then that'll help bring down overtime costs. And there's just a lot more stability of people going out the door because we've just got a long habit of hiring large groups of people at once, both in police and fire.
So right now you could give 60 days notice and retire if you're of that age.
Yes,
Whereas with drop, you're basically giving 3 years notice
exactly.
as the bill's designed. I have more questions, but I'm over my time. Councilmember Pinto?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you all for your testimony. I really appreciate your perspectives, and it just amazes me how much overtime we are asking of our hardworking first responders, and both agencies, Fire and EMS and MPD, are spending tens of millions of dollars a year on overtime. And that is, of course, extremely taxing to the budgets of those agencies and also to the personnel of those agencies. I'm curious from your perspective, President Hoagland and maybe Vice President Pantelis and Chairman Pemberton, just kind of practically from your conversations with your members, what are you hearing about people's likelihood to participate in a program like this if they had an option to extend their retirement several years? Because one of the pieces of pushback that we get is, well, people want to retire when they're going to retire, and you're not going to change their mind. So what are you hearing on the ground from your members?
So we've got a whole new generation of firefighters coming on the job. We've also got a lot of firefighters coming on of all ages, whereas there used to be a minimum requirement for age. But more and more, right, as especially post-pandemic and people think about their personal lives and their home lives, more and more of the conversation around the firehouse is I'm leaving right at 25 years, right when I have 25 years. And that's concerning for us just because looking at the numbers, because of retirements, we're now down to about, we're going to have 250 to 300 members who are reaching that 25-year mark here coming up over the next few months. I think Chairman Pemberton can speak to his members, and DVP Pantelis obviously can speak to, as he noted in his testimony, just the recruitment challenges across the nation to really attract young people to these careers. And more, it's coming down to financial incentives.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Mr. Pinto?
Oh, sorry.
Or Chairman Pemberton. I can't see you. Go ahead.
I'll go ahead. Thank you, Councilmember Pinto. What I would say is when the bill was introduced, when you introduced it back in July, we published that information to our members, and it is probably one of the top 2 or 3 things that members are asking us about when we go around. When we talk to members in roll call, or we have union meetings, or we get stopped in the hallways at the districts, everyone wants to know how quickly this can be put in place, because they all want to take advantage of it. And what we're hearing is that members would normally just retire and move on and look for secondary employment elsewhere. But now that people realize that this program, it has a potential to exist, they want to stay with the department those 3 years and take advantage of this program, where the other option is to retire at 25 years, collect your annuity, and then again, go find secondary employment. What we're seeing is there is much more interest in the idea of a drop program than there is in the SPO program, which is where members separate, trigger their retirement, and then they're rehired by the department as senior police officers. And that program, we've seen a lot less interest in. And when we talk to members about the difference, unquestionably, members are more excited about a drop program than they are about taking advantage of the SPO program.
Thank you.
So I think DVP Pantelis got pulled into a hurricane prep meeting at 3, but I'll let him chime in if he needs to. But yeah, short answer to your question is these are incredibly popular programs and members would certainly take advantage of it if it was available.
Thank you very much. I want to ask you, Ms. Bell, are you still here? Oh, you dropped off. Okay. I was interested in this idea of expansion to teachers because a lot of times when we talk about members of MPD or FENS, people may come in to make assumptions. They come in at all ages, but sometimes they come in at earlier ages and the retirement age is pretty low. Even after you've been on the force or in the department for 25 years. And so I would be curious how that impacts teachers and kind of the reasons for teachers leaving. But we can circle back with her on that. I'll stop there to honor the time clock and come back for another end. Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember. So let me ask Mr. Bush or Mr. Kim. My recollection is that these drop programs have sometimes elsewhere been very unprofitable or fiscally damaging to jurisdictions. Why, and maybe I don't really mean to phrase it that way, what about those programs made them unprofitable, and how are we avoiding that here?
Mr. Chairman, oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just say, I have the luxury of seeing a ton of these plans, and I'd say plan design. I think that an overstated interest rate, I believe this is going to have a fixed interest rate here to make sure that it's in line with the pension earnings. I think that's probably one of the #1 reasons. And as I stated from the very outset, is that is one of the things, the first question that was asked of me to ensure that we make sure these are cost neutral as much as possible. Now, I will say, I think that in my experience and with the plans that we administered at Empower, I say it's a very slim majority, or minority of the plans, I should say, a correction, actually come to a point where it's not a cost neutral perspective because the plan design has been very intentional from the outset. So I think that when you take a look at it, it's very difficult to really determine that it's going to be a detriment or any sort of a financial cost that would be, I guess, a bearing to the district. But plan design is the key to that. And dealing with the union leaders, I know that they have been very judicious again about going about how to plan design to mitigate that from happening. So I would say that the majority of the plans across the country do not fall in the category that you had described, sir, based on my experience.
The last part you just said, a majority of the plans around the country do not fall in that category. Is that what you said?
Yeah, do not fall in the category of being a financial burden to the plan or to the district. That's correct. They're usually well-ran plans that are cost neutral.
Kim?
Yes, I would underscore that. There was a drop plan from the middle of the country that unfortunately set its interest crediting very high at a fixed rate. They have since changed that. And so again, I think we've have a long track record of nearly 50 years. I think we've learned a lot. And just like with the parent pension plans, sustainability is a key. And it's something that it's obsessed about by plan sponsors, by participants, as well as the plans themselves. And so as the district considers a drop program, making sure that the interest crediting is equal to what the plan earns is a key component of that.
And Mr. Chair, Kelly Bush, if I may just add to that, I apologize. Also, another downside to a lot of these drop plans and the creation of them that has since course corrected has been that they do not set any sort of drop period, 3 or 5 years. They kind of let it go in perpetuity. And when that happens, then that's very difficult to maintain costs and maintain a competitive from a financial fiscal standpoint. But most of those plans, again, I'm dating myself going back probably 10 years, a decade. That's how a lot of those were designed, and that has since gone away. So I just want to make sure I provided that clarification.
So the bill we have is for 3 years. 3 years seems to work, but I think I heard some testimony that longer could work as well.
I am most aware of drop plans between a 3 to 5 year period.
Mr. Chair, I'd say
Yes.
80% of the drop plans we have in our books are a 3-year drop plan.
So the key to controlling cost is the interest rate. But should it be fixed or should it be flexible?
Again, I think that's a conversation you have with the plan, the participant and their representatives. I think, again, making sure that it is cost neutral to the plan and the plan sponsor is paramount. And so, again, that should be part of the conversation.
One other question. I have some more, but one question before I lose my time. There's been a lot of testimony of the surrounding jurisdictions, but almost every jurisdiction cited was in Maryland. Montgomery County and Baltimore County and Baltimore City, and I think Prince George's County, and I don't think there's anything left in Maryland. Virginia?
Yes, Arlington and Fairfax. They both have drop plans. And as I was saying, I serve as a trustee on the Fairfax County Retirement Systems, and we have a drop plan.
I'll have a few more questions in a minute. Councilmember Pinto?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Kim, given your experience in seeing how this plays out in other jurisdictions, and the retirement board will be responsible for administering the drop program here, do you have a sense of if any additional resources, whether that's staffing, technology, or other administrative costs they might need to manage separate accounts, cost of living adjustments, and other interest rates?
I think that might be a question that's better answered by Mr. Bush. I don't really have direct experience running a drop program, so I don't know what additional resources might be required, or ask the DC Retirement Board themselves.
Okay, I know I was planning on it, but since they're not here today, thought I'd turn to you, but certainly Mr. Bush, if you have thoughts on those.
Yeah, Councilmember Pinto, there would not be an increase. There would not be a need for an increase for the administration of drop plan that would incur additional costs for employees or headcounts, et cetera. You would have to have some sort of actuarial oversight, actuarial reporting. That usually goes in conjunction with the pension actuaries, et cetera, or you could have a separate one. It all depends on that. Probably, in my opinion, that I would consider one of the poster childs of this program would be the Ohio Police and Fire Pension Fund out of Ohio. If you go across the country and people are looking for some sort of best practice or kind of a blueprint for that, they do that, and there's not an additional staff for that as well. So I'm very familiar with that plan, as I have sat on that board before. So something to consider.
Okay.
I do want to note, retirement board is here. They don't present testimony, but I'm going to call them up for some questions.
Councilmember Pinto, I'll add that, so we did a joint actuary valuation with FOP that we've gotten some preliminary data on, and they did bake administrative costs into that actuarial valuation, and there was not much effect on it.
Okay, thank you. And also to you, President Hoagland, this has been something that's been talked about for years in the district, and it's something that you've worked hard on. There have been some who oppose this effort, saying that it would be very expensive to the district. Can you talk a little bit more about cost neutrality and kind of how you think that this could be implemented without serving as such a cost?
Yeah, so when this last came up, we had a CFO that just kind of spoke casually about these programs who had come from a jurisdiction to what Hank and Kelly mentioned, they had a set interest rate of something like 8% rate of return, which is just irresponsible. The target rate of DCRB's fund is about 6.25%. Is their target rate of return. Over the last 20 years, that's come out to about 6.1%. So as the legislation as written, we built in an initial 2-year experience study on cost neutrality, and then every 5 years after that. And it also says that DCRB will set the interest rate. So there's also an arbitrage here for DCRB in the sense that if their fund's making a 6.1% average over 20 years, and we set the interest rate for the drop accounts, they decide to set their interest rate at the drop account for 4%. That money's still living into the fund, and hence there's the ability there for the retirement fund to actually make money off of the program, as some of the witnesses up here testified that, in a place like Ohio, for instance, over 20 years, they've done 4 experience studies, and their drop program actually makes money for their fund.
Okay, thank you very much. Does anyone else have other thoughts about cost neutrality for the program?
Mr. Hernandez, I'm going to recognize you later. I'm going to call all the retirement board folks up.
Councilmember Pinto, just to, answer that question, I think, one of the things that's important to look at too is that as members process out for retirement, there's this sort of, overnight switchover. Like one day they're employed by MPD, the next day they're not, and now they're sort of waiting on receiving that first monthly annuity payment. And sometimes there can be a delay in processing that through just the administrative functions of the agency and DCRB. In this model, members who took advantage of the drop program, when they did finally separate and then they stopped receiving that by monthly paycheck, they would immediately transfer over into their annuity payments because those annuity payments are already being made. So it's really just a question of changing where those annuity payments land, which could be as quickly as overnight. And instead of waiting, what might be several months until members receive that initial annuity payment. So there's also a possibility that there's time saved from the perspective of processing retirement payments when we look at it from that perspective. I just wanted to add that one point. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think that's really helpful context. Thank you all. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember. So a few more questions. So there was testimony from the teachers union to add them. I'm going to look at the 2 experts first. Mr. Bush.
Yes, I mean, there are a handful of times I could say, Mr. Chair, where we will see unions that the teachers will try, teachers union will come in and just create their separate drop plan or what we will say will piggyback onto a drop plan of public safety, et cetera. That's usually left up to the districts, obviously, or to the individual agencies to make that determination. But that would also, I would assume, that would probably take another set of probably assessments or actuarial probably forecasting for that, I would assume. I'm not an actuary, don't claim to be, but that would be my best guess. Something we see, not routinely, but something we will see across the country when we do administer these drop plans.
So the elements in the proposal before us with regard to public safety would not necessarily be the same for teachers. Is that what you're saying?
I wouldn't have privy to that. I would say that from a drop program, as far as we're concerned and what I do across the country on consulting on drop programs, it is all the same. I mean, it's the drop program is a drop program, whether or not it's going to align and correlate directly to the public safety drop program. I think I would have to leave that up to the union leaders, both the Teachers Association as well as the FOP and the IFF.
But I wasn't asking policy, I was asking neutrality. So if what's being proposed for police and fire is cost neutral, could we just simply add teachers with regard to add teachers to the bill without there being a fiscal impact?
I don't feel comfortable in saying that. I'm not sure there would be. I don't have the preview details on that just to make an overarching statement like that, sir. I think that you'd have to take a look at their pension, et cetera, and how that would operate. I think you'd almost, in my world, almost have to underwrite that individually to see if that would have any impact on the current bill that's in front of you. And that's just from my industry experience, my industry perspective.
Right, well, that's the answer. I mean, that's an answer. Mr. Kim?
Yeah, I would, so I agree with Mr. Bush. I'm not sure if I can speak expertly or with authority on your question. I would suggest that, a similar approach with what the firefighters and the FOP have done, which is do an actuarial study, would be very helpful.
Let's see. The bill that we have is about 6 pages long, double spaced. What if we shortened it down to a page or two and said, there's established a drop program, retirement system, figure it out? Would that be okay? Or maybe I could phrase that a little differently, and that is, typically, are the details defined as proposed here in law, or is most of it defined by the retirement board by rulemaking? Mr. Kim, then
So-
Mr. Bush?
Yeah, so my experience, again, is the way drop plans are enacted and or implemented is varied throughout the country. Whether you have a one-page enacting legislation or 6 pages, I think what is really important is to make sure that, regardless of the length, that the sustainability of the parent plan, as well as the drop program, is that paramount goal is expressed in the authorizing legislation.
And I would echo that, Mr. Chair. And I would also say what you have in front of you is 6 pages, I would say would be pretty rudimentary and standard across the country when new bills like this are being introduced.
I mean, other jurisdictions have had something a little bit more detailed?
Let's say it's very similar to what you have in front of you, sir.
Similar, okay.
Yes.
2 more questions. Mr. Pemberton, do you see this drop program as a hiring incentive or a means to reduce attrition?
I think the number one target here is retirees, right? As I testified, 50% of the retirees over the past 5 years have been leaving at eligibility, that they're not staying beyond that. And so that's the main focus here, is that we can incentivize them to stay for 3 years beyond when they normally would have left. And if we can get some impact on that category of people, the people that are planning to retire at 25 years, that could go a long way to help stabilize the staffing levels, which every year for the past 6 years has been a deficit. But I do think there's a very important secondary target to this, which is younger members and potential future candidates of employment. When we talk to them about this, I'll be perfectly honest, when you talk to brand new recruits about retirement, they glaze over. It's so far off for them, they don't like to really think about it. But what we see with potential recruits is that they are now shopping around for things like these benefits, and they are looking for these type of benefits that come not only with your working conditions, but also potential retirement options. So I do think it goes a long way towards recruiting. I think it goes a long way towards this category of people, and say that 5 to 10 year where we're seeing a lot of resignations and they're looking for greener grasses somewhere. Maybe there's a portion of them that we can convince that those grasses aren't greener by offering a program like this. So I would say the main target is those people who are approaching retirement, to try to get them to stick around for this program. But then secondarily is the younger members, and then potential recruit officers.
So, Mr. Hoagland, do you see this as more of a reducing retirements or increasing new hires?
I think it's really both, right? To the FOP chair's point, we need to retain the experienced employees so that we can train the new ones. But as we're all trained to national standards, right? There's departments all over the country. We'll lose members who think about going to work somewhere because a smaller town is offering to buy their time at DCRB into their own pension fund. And as we get increasingly competitive, all these jurisdictions are coming up with these creative ways to get people. So, you were probably chuckling a little bit when we mentioned paramedics because not much has changed since you had the Judiciary Committee. Paramedics can go work anywhere in the country, any day, anytime they want to with that accreditation. And it holds true to a lot of other people within our profession. So it's really the twofold goal of predicting attrition so that we can hire and recruit to get there, but also to retain those experienced employees so that we can better predict attrition and keep them from leaving at 25 and going to work somewhere else.
Couple more questions. Why shouldn't this be collectively bargained, Mr. Hoagland?
Because we believe that anything related to our retirement board and the retirement fund should be legislated. I think it gets us a clear plan, to speak to your idea about, well, why don't we just simplify this legislation and just give it to DCRB? We're not necessarily opposed to that, but I think this, we're here telling you that this is a here and now problem. So I think we would, if we were to do something like that, we would want to have strong implementation guidelines for a plan like that and timelines attached to it so that it actually happens. You're no stranger, right? They're headed to arbitration and collectively bargain. WTU just got a deal. We're 8 days into our CBA being expired. I think legislatively is a much more efficient and simplified way to get this done. And it sets it in stone and we'll have all of those benchmarks in place to evaluate the cost effectiveness of the program.
Mr. Pemberton, same question to you. Why shouldn't this be collectively bargained?
So bargaining with MPD involves those two parties, right? I can sit across the table with the chief of police, the command staff, general counsel of MPD, and we can knock out policies and argue over them until we get them to a place where we can agree upon them. When you start adding third parties in here, particularly other government agencies, I think it gets pretty complicated because those bargaining rights, some people will argue, don't extend into those third party agencies. So what we're looking for here is this sort of whole of government approach where the council sort of sets the tone as to what this program should look like, builds an infrastructure, and then approves that through the legislative process, ultimately getting signed by the mayor, which would then sort of direct the city to implement the program, rather than sort of have an individual union bargaining with management of that agency and coming to an agreement, and then those two parties having to go to a third agency to get the program implemented. That to me seems a little bit more clunky than the process that we're trying to embark on here today.
One last question. As written, it excludes fire officers above the rank of captain and police officers above the rank of sergeant, despite the fact that those individuals are all paying into and belonging to the same retirement fund. Why are we excluding them, or why don't we include them?
So, Mr. Chairman, we're offering this up as a choice, and it's meant to address rank and file members on the street. If you had a drop account for people outside of our bargaining unit, their drop payout would be 40% more than the average rank and file member. This is a considerably larger value to a considerably smaller portion of the agency. And we don't think that aligns with the intent of the program or the optics of government service. Because in order to maintain cost neutrality, the rank and file would have to sacrifice additional financial interest to include these positions in the program. It's not just interest rate that are some of these levers that we can pull, right? There's also members' contribution while you're in the drop account to keep it cost neutral. You've heard discussion of COLAs while in the drop. There's about a half a dozen different ways changing the eligibility and enrollment terms to ensure that these programs are cost neutral. And that's where we've taken these examples from across the country to do that. And with our preliminary actuarial evaluation, we've already seen that we're going to need to tweak the legislation as presented to maintain that cost neutrality.
Mr. Pemberton?
I would agree with President Hoagland, and just to kind of drill down on that, the command staff officials have significantly higher salaries. And so to include them in the program is going to increase the liabilities. And in order to make sure that those liabilities are addressed and that they don't bring the program revenue neutral, as President Hoagland said, we have to sort of fine tune those levers, as everyone has been talking about today. And now, the 3,000 rank and file members who have an opportunity to participate in this, it's now less of an incentive, or the financial benefits have now been decreased in order to include a significantly smaller portion. But what's even more important to me, I think, than the financial liabilities that exist is that we don't have an attrition problem with commanders and assistant chiefs. These folks, stick around. They don't have jobs where they're getting burnt out through overtime. They're not trying to make ends meet as rank and file police officers. This is the problem that we're trying to address here today, is that we cannot staff the department within the ranks of the union. We don't have a problem staffing, lieutenants and captains and commanders. And as a matter of fact, all of the numbers that I talked about reducing earlier in my testimony, management has actually grown in size over the past 4 or 5 years. So the idea that we're trying to fix hiring numbers, it doesn't exist within the command staff. And so rather than include a much smaller portion and increase the financial liabilities to the plan, we think it makes much more sense to have it included to the people that we're targeting here, which is rank and file members.
So you mentioned targeting rank and file, but separately, you're both saying to add the fire officers above the rank of captain and police officers above the rank of sergeant would significantly alter the fiscal impact or the cost, the finances around this plan. Am I understanding that correctly?
I don't know if I'll be able to say significantly, but I do know that the liabilities will increase.
I think he was saying significantly.
Yeah, well, it's more so that, so we've got, I think between our two unions, we've got 275 chief officers, and there's probably, so by his count and our count together, we're talking 5,000 rank and file members. So what I think is also significant, right, we've talked about, is they have high salaries. We don't have a retention problem in our management level ranks. We talk about some of the negative optics of these drop programs. You're talking about an administrative employee leaving with a pretty large lump sum of money if they were to participate in these drop accounts.
So let me ask Mr. Kim and Mr. Bush, are there other drop plans that include all of the members of fire or all the members of police?
I am aware, yes, there are those that do include them.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I would say that, yes, obviously there are other plans out there to include them, but I would also recognize that the union members and then the bills that go forward that are looking for cost neutrality to making sure something can be sustained will typically abstain from including any of the senior management or the commanders, et cetera, captains, et cetera, from the drop program. So it's not unusual to see that across the country for cost neutrality.
Not unusual to see the upper ranks excluded, and it is another one of those levers for cost neutrality.
Correct.
Oh, Mr. Bush, you muted yourself.
I'm sorry, I said that is correct, sir, and that is part of my testimony in terms of plan design is the most critical component of cost neutrality for sustainability as well.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just add one comment on that last question. As President Hoagland testified to, that the plan has built into itself these ongoing studies at 2 and 5 years and consistently after that. Obviously, adding any other group of people at any time is something that could be considered at a later time. I think what we want to do is try to get the plan in place in a way that's functional, that's revenue neutral, that encourages members to take advantage of it, that stabilizes the attrition numbers, and not to overcomplicate it, if you will. So that's why we've sort of framed it as in the current framework that's out there now. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? I have no other questions for any of you. Thank you all very much. Testimony's been helpful. A couple of you are going to give me written statements. And if you want to add to the statements in light of the questions, that would be great. Thank you all. Let me ask Mr. Mr. Hernandez, Mr. Balistrieri, anybody else who wants to come forward? In retirement board? Give me just a second. So I have to remember, you do not have a statement, so it's up to me to ask you some questions.
Certainly, Chair Mendelson, I have here with me the pension administrator for DCRB, Daniel Hernandez, and trustee Lyle Blanchard, as well as our senior counsel for benefits and compliance. Firstly, I want to thank Chair Mendelson and the council for letting us answer a couple questions. Our intent is to submit a full statement by the close record date, October 22nd. I do want to start off by saying we do support the opportunity for a drop program, but do want to caution and explain to the council that there are a lot of items to review and to get thorough with on the scope of work of DCRB versus the plans and the employer agencies in this process of implementing the drop program, as well as the necessary changes to and amendments to the legislation to make it clear related to those differences. There's also going to be more than likely some costs, which my colleague will generally explain what they are. And then that will be subject to more specific statement we'll provide by October 22nd.
Mr. Hernandez?
Yes, thank you very much for being here today. We do support the active members, as Executive Director Balistrieri did mention, and this legislation in general. There has been some cost discussions as this legislation has been introduced, and it's particularly administrative costs for DCRB, including the maintaining of those separate accounts, whether it's at a custodial bank or third party. There are some technology needs, as we currently do not have systems in place for that. And finally, we do have stakeholders and partner agencies that we need to work with on regulations and policies and procedures. So I see in the legislation, it is 90 days. And so forth. There, all that information and work needs to be worked out, which includes an administrative cost, whether you have consultants building some of this, writing the policies and procedures, and just working out the details. The guts of the legislation are there, but as everyone has mentioned already in this hearing, it's all about the plan design and the rules and regulations around them.
That was a lot. So I'm not sure what to do with that. You're going to submit detailed comments within the next 2 weeks.
Correct. We're going to submit that by October 22nd. We're going to be working with legal counsel as well as our team on what the costs associated with the drop plan are, what the tasks of DCRB are versus third parties pursuant to our mandate as an agency representing the funds of active and retired members.
What does that last point mean? Something versus third parties?
Well, there's certain things that we do, administer payments and reimbursements, et cetera. But in order to affect this plan in the ordinary course, there are the plan sponsors themselves are basically the settler of the trust of these plans. And so there's certain things that they have to get done. You want to add to that?
Correct. Third parties include the stakeholder agencies, the MPD, DCHR. We're going to be working with Octo and then other third parties, OPRS. And also we have other third parties in that terminology, including custodial banks who might be holding these accounts. DCRB does not act as the savings account type atmosphere. And as you know, current annuity payments are made from the U.S. Treasury, which do not have the ability to take on the type of district program right now.
How much of that is real? So for instance, Treasury only has pre-1987 employees, right?
Yeah.
How many firefighters and police officers who are not senior officers are there?
We still have a small amount that are split employees that have both federal liability and district, but the majority, you are right, are.
Well, how many?
I don't know.
You don't have to give me a specific number. Are we talking about 100 or
Yeah, we're
about
talking
3?
yeah. Oh, we're talking maybe less than 500 that are split liability cases.
But they would have to be pre-1987
in
employees.
1996, I'm sorry.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Yes.
And that's, help me here, that's 30 years.
Yes, 30. And we still have some of those out there. So, yeah, and split liability cases, yeah.
Okay, so that would be a complicating factor.
Wouldn't be, it would be definitely anything, their system would not be able to be handled. It's a federal system, so we'd have to look for that third party outsider to handle those accounts.
Okay, and this is part of what you're going to look at over the next couple of weeks.
Correct.
The statement that you
Correct.
sent us. With regard to the accounts, the impression I got from the testimony earlier was that basically all the money would stay in the retirement funds and your investment accounts, but there would be an accounting. So rather than pulling, if I'm the one who retires, rather than pulling my 3 years salary out, it would just be, the money would still stay in the investment accounts and there would just be an accounting.
That is true. We are working with our CFO's office and at DCRB for that. Now, the accounting would have to be, of course, easily changed. And secondly, how much of that would be accessible for the member himself who wants maybe to see their account balance, like a 401A? Would you like to be, would you want to see that? Do you get statements? A lot of those nuances are not designed yet.
Okay. So that's what you were referring to when you were talking about third party.
Correct.
Figuring a lot of this stuff out. I believe Mr. Hogan talked about an actuarial study that they did. Have you seen that?
There is a current actuarial study conducted, as I understand, by the unions, and they're using the firm right now, which we have supplied active data for them and actual actuarial assumptions from our actuary. So there is no final report that I've seen yet, but the data has been provided.
We assume we'll be getting that report within a week or two. Or sooner, so that we can actually apply it to our statement comments by October the 22nd.
Sure. Now I realize that the only actuarial study that counts is the one that you secure, but you are interested in seeing the one that they have done.
Correct. And it's our understanding that the Office of Chief Financial Officer is also conducting this study as we speak too.
Okay. So I'm looking at some prepared questions. Have you or your team reviewed the legislation from a technical perspective? Not to answer my own question, but the answer is probably yes, but that's what your more detailed statement will be.
Correct. We'll provide our responses and comments and prospective proposed amendments that reflect precisely what we need. We do have my Benefits and Compliance Counsel. Would you like to add to that at all?
Hi, I'm Kate Robinson. We have started engaging in the analysis based on what we have. We've talked a little bit with our outside counsel about some tax qualification issues that we foresee. So we're starting to iron out those details And we'll certainly be highlighting these issues individually in our written statement.
Okay. So I asked a variation of this question earlier. Could we put an authorization in the law for the retirement board to establish a drop with broad guardrails and leave it to the retirement board to implement? It seems like the bill that we have before us is very prescriptive. And maybe it would be better if we left more of the details up to the retirement board.
Yeah, typically the rules and setting the around the drop program is usually the plan sponsor, which is the district, or in this case, not DCRB, we're more of the administrator. So we can definitely provide guidance and costing and some other things like that. But as far as writing the rules and so forth, it necessarily is not in our purview.
All right, well, I meant the law. I didn't mean the rules. Law.
Well, the law too, but that's usually done by the plan sponsor, just like the retirement plan. DCRB did not promulgate those rules, so that was promulgated by the district.
So my brilliant idea, which is a one-page bill that we passed saying, go do it, is not a good idea.
Not applicable.
It's better, council member, it's better to have clear guidance in the statute.
Yeah.
So that whatever agency is responsible for promulgating the rules does it within those boundaries. And based on my experience many years ago working for the executive branch, it's always better to spell things out for those attorneys that then have to put together some regulations.
Okay.
Thank you.
Do any of you have any perspective on how drops have operated in other jurisdictions and what the impact has been on the funds?
We do have some of the same research Mr. Bush and the NC PERS member also have, so they can be cost neutral. I totally agree. It's all about plan design and also those guardrails and rules and regulations behind it, which need to be firm and set. Fairfax has some things out there, Montgomery. A lot of this stuff is publicly available and it's often ongoing, and we're going to use their experiences to help us with this.
And the plan design includes, without limitation, who from those plan sponsors have the ownership of implementation while we provide, including prior to October 22nd and after, guidance on what they need for implementation, what we require for their implementation so that we can properly administrate once it's implemented.
Chairman Mendelson.
Yes, sir.
Just the board has not met formally to take a position on this bill. Our next regular board meeting will be the 17th of October. So that's why we're not presenting formal testimony today.
Okay, that's helpful to know. I don't have any other questions for you. Please keep in close touch with Mr. Cash so we know where we're going with this. I want to thank each of you for your testimony and the previous witnesses and look forward to getting more detail, something in writing from you in a couple weeks. Thank you all. So I'm going to wind this hearing down or up or something. This has been a hearing on Bill 25-928, the Deferred Retirement Option Program Amendment Act of 2024. The record will close at 5 p.m. on October 22nd, 2024. Time is 3:57 p.m. and this hearing is